Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be going over the highlights from the Eddieville 6-hour race that happened this last weekend, where I raced the Rusty Iron class, which is an Ironman class for people 50 and over. Sorry for starting the video a little bit late. We ended up doing a cold engine start where we stood behind the motorcycle, and I was so focused on that I did not turn the camera on. So I apologize. However, this is where we are early in the race. I got a mid-pack start in wave 2, which was the wave the Ironman classes were in. Wave 1 was made up of all of the team classes for the 6-hour race. As you can see, conditions were dusty and dry. The course had a clay base with loose dirt on top, and then there were sections which you'll see where we had the deep light clay dust where the bikes had broken through the clay layer and makes the dust really light and deep. And there's also some various rocky sections on this course. At this point in the race, I was just trying to feel out the track. I hadn't ridden on the track, and the course had some new sections put in from when I've done this race in the past. So at this point in the race, I'm just trying to learn the course on lap 1. That way I can get myself into a good pace on the future laps. With this being a 6-hour race and me being in an Ironman class, I know from past experience that people will tire out and wear themselves out, and so where you begin the race isn't necessarily where you're going to end the race, as people take breaks and decide that they've had enough. Here at this point, I'm just finishing up the start loop. It was not a full loop, so I went ahead and cut the highlights to this point, where I'm going to show you the full loop of the course starting from the checkpoint. And there's only one checkpoint on this course. So we start out running the motocross track in reverse from the way that it's normally run. Again, you can see it's dry, dusty, loose. You're fighting for traction, especially on the rear wheel. Some sections, the front end, for me, wanted to push. I did start out this race. So I did end up racing my dual sport bike for this race, and that's because my 2023 Gas EC350 ended up having a sensor error and was not running right, and so my backup bike ends up being my dual sport bike. This motorcycle is a 2018 XCF 250, and I put a dual sport kit on it. I softened the suspension, spark arrestor, and typically it has dual sport tires, although I did have for this race a off-road set of tires. The front tire was a MX33 with a moose in it, and the rear tire was a Tusk Recon, their cheater hybrid style tire. One of the things that I found earlier in this race was the fact that my front end was feeling vague in the corners. The moose in essence gave it a 10 psi feel in the front, and that was causing my knobs to walk. So I found myself tiptoeing around the corners through the first half of this race because I kept having the vague feeling in the front end. Sometimes it would understeer, sometimes it would oversteer. It got to where the bike was almost starting to throw me down in some spots. And of course, when this is happening, I'm debating, do I go in the future, do a pit stop and put on a spare wheel that I had sitting in my motorcycle trailer. So this was something that was kind of running through my mind for the first roughly 40 miles of the race. The weather overall for our race was pretty good. It was sunny. We had highs in the mid to high 60s, and the only downside was the wind kicked up pretty hard later in the race, with gusts somewhere in the 35 to 40 miles per hour. This section of the course runs along a field, and you can get up to pretty good speed, but then you have to make a hard left-hand corner at this pond, and if you're not careful, you can overbake the corner and end up in the pond, which apparently people have done in the past. The other part is this little earthen dam gets pretty chopped up with holes that can kick you around, so you got to be careful not to get yourself kicking around and swap off the edge of the berm. Now we're getting to a section that has telephone poles down to make a series of log jumps. These kind of have a kicker lip to them in some sections, so you kind of have to take it fairly steady and easy on the throttle. And I'll tell you, when you're getting pretty tired later in the race, those log jumps really start to fatigue you in the arms. Then we turn into the kids' motocross track. We do a little section of it before entering back onto the service roads that wind up around the farm and towards the windmills. So once we enter the service roads, we get a little bit of a rest, although they do have some choppy parts, rain ruts. A couple sections are filled with marbly rocks, and you got to be careful not to hit the edge of a rock because it'll cause your front end to kick it out and potentially get a pinch flat. But right now I'm just working on settling into a good groove on my second lap, trying to get my pace down that I can hold for the whole race, and coming up on a slower rider who's going along, so of course I'm going to go by them, but the other guy ahead, I'm not going to push to try to pass him. I find that in years past I would get a little wound up and try to chase down some of these folks and race them hard, and all I ended up doing was wearing myself out for the tail end of the race and not maximizing the number of miles that I could get down to try to push for a win. This year my approach is completely different. I was working to pace myself. I had a goal of 120 miles for the 6-hour race, and I was going to try to see where that would put me overall in the standings. I've run this race in the past 2 years, in fact every time, on this dual sport bike. which has kind of bummed me out why I had to ride the dual sport bike again. I was looking forward to running the EC 300 on this course. Anyways, in the past, I would get a little wound up, and I was get tired, and I found myself not getting in as many laps as possible. The first time I did this race, it was actually quite muddy because it was earlier in the year. It was actually pretty fun with it being muddy, definitely challenging, and I ended up with a 5th place in the Rusty Iron class. Last year, when I did the race, it was actually a little later in the year than this time. It was very hot. We were in the 90 degrees that day, and I ended up getting 4th place in the Rusty Iron class. And so my goal was to do the 120 miles, and hopefully it would put me in the top 3. That was where I was looking to be, to see if I could improve to the top 3 in the class. There's a lot of these sections in here where you just have square-edged bumps and holes and rocks, and it's just a constant jostling, and you're having to absorb all these bumps with your arms and your legs. And after doing this for 6 hours, you get to where your whole body just wants to cramp up. And about this point of the race, I was noticing that I was already starting to deal with some cramping in my throttle hand, and that was pretty depressing. That was bumming me out. I was hoping that I wouldn't be dealing with cramps and numbness in my hands this early into the race. And so I started trying to conserve a little bit on how much I used my front brake, and instead of riding the way I usually ride, which is one finger on the clutch, one finger on the front brake, I started just holding on to the throttle tube with all my fingers and not using the front brake at all, to try to give my hand a break from the cramping that I had been experiencing. The suspension valving on this motorcycle is also set up to be, pretty plush overall. And in addition, I run some flex bars on the front to help with past injuries where I've had wrist injuries and dealt with a lot of tendonitis over the past few years, as well as arthritis. And I find the flex bars do really help take a lot of that numbing chatter out. So this section is going to drop into a little area where the course starts to narrow down a little bit. We're coming into a few more rocks that can kind of kick you around, and then a section that had a lot of acceleration and braking bumps. I started looking more and more for smoother lines, trying to avoid the main line that would be considered the faster line, but also the rougher line. It took me a while to narrow down the sections that were the smoothest, but eventually I think I put together some laps at the end that were using most of the smooth lines, not necessarily the fastest lines, but what were the smoothest lines. This section in here is all whooped out and has some square edge quick kickers, and again we come into some whoops that have rocks on them just before we turn left back onto a main access road. We're going to wind our way up and around on these sweepers on the access road, which are actually a lot of fun. You can get moving along pretty fast. Actually start to get a little bit of a flow with the whole situation. So my pacing just kind of had me eating this person's dust for quite a ways. Wasn't really trying to push to pass, although we got along here and I started getting closer and closer, and there was another rider that was coming up, and so looking for an opportunity to pass was starting to enter my mind. And so here I took the opportunity to make the pass and just go ahead and move up onto the rear of this other rider. And into clean air. This section of the course had multiple lines that you could choose from. It was really difficult trying to find the smoothest line. I think, again, I eventually did, but there was just a lot of chop that would really beat you up. This line right here, I ended up using for pretty much all of the race. It was the best line through this section. Actually made some time up on folks. In subsequent laps I ended up staying a little bit more to the left along this part of the track. So now we're coming up to the end of this straightaway section. We're going to hang a left across the access road, and then we're going to drop down into a newer section for me of the course. I had never ridden this section before on the 2 prior times I raced this event. The owner of of the property had some people spaced out, especially along the backside, to look for riders in distress, to help them out, which was great that they had folks out there in the UTVs ready to help. Also had a couple of people out on motorcycles sweeping and looking to help others. This was one of 2 mud crossings that we had on what was otherwise a very dry course. So this section was pretty well beat up too. Had some big ruts down here at the end. And then we come back along the side of the motocross track, and we run along a fence line here. And this fence line takes us down along the side of another field and is kind of heading back towards the pit area now on the course. So down here we have a couple of hacked up corners before we get to a dirt oval that they have. I guess they used to run some flat track contests out here. And so this is an area where you can get some speed up, but there were a lot of acceleration and braking bumps on this flat track. Later in the race I started cutting over more to the left and riding in some of the weeds just because it didn't have all the kicker bumps, and without a steering damper I was getting a little nervous going super fast with all those little bumps. If I had a steering damper I probably wouldn't have cared as much, but rather be safe than sorry. All right, we're heading towards pit row. It's almost the end of a full lap, and we were running a 5 mile per hour zone here in pit row. This is where I would take some time, take a few sips off of my hydration pack. Oh yeah, on this lap, I just remembered I came in for a pit stop because my hands and legs were my knees were starting to ache, and so I ended up putting a bunch of muscle rub on me to help with my knees, and also I put it on the forearms to kind of help loosen those up, and actually it worked pretty good. So that was a longer break that I ended up taking. Didn't want to take that long of a break this early in the race, but I ended up doing it anyways. I think that was about a 20-minute break that I ended up taking overall. And now we're finishing out the last part of the course, coming back towards the timing and scoring area. This timing and scoring area, they put down some bales to slow folks down and tires, and it's actually on a side hill a little bit, and when you have short legs it becomes a little difficult at times to not tip over because you're going so darn slow. Alright, so this part of my video is really just kind of some highlights of people passing me, and I ended up passing a couple other folks, but a lot of the people that ended up passing me at this point of the race were people that were on teams. They were, fresh. They were able to go for it, and for me, I just wasn't able to push at that same speed because it was just me. I wasn't part of a team. And there's always the temptation to try to chase these folks down. That competitiveness comes back in, and you're always having to remind yourself, no, stick to the plan, nice and easy, steady pace, get into a flow, click off the laps. Here there's a guy passing me through the log section. I knew he was coming up on me, that he was faster, so I ended up taking the right hand line, which is not the main line, and I left the main line for him. There were several times you won't be able to see in the video where I knew faster guys were coming up on me and I just waved them by. I didn't even want to mess with, having them trying to fight to get by me and potentially do a pass that was a little too close for comfort. And lots of dust. That little kid, he was a trooper. He's out there on a 65 doing the Ironman, youth Ironman class, and he was really doing good out there. Again, getting past like I'm standing still, but that's the way it is. Here they moved the bales in, they put the tires in weird spots, and I hit the tire, ended up falling over right before timing and scoring. And of course I was kind of tired, and so picking the bike up was a little difficult, and I lost it again. Pretty embarrassing, but what can I say? I'm an old guy with short legs and a fairly heavy bike. Timing and scoring lady took pity on me, and the next time I came around she told me she moved the bales back further apart so that we would have an easier time, and I really appreciated that. And here's the guy that just passed me in the shot before. Ended up going a little too fast around that corner and ended up falling over. We'll see him again later as he passes me back by right there down that fence line section. And at this pit stop, I decided it was time to put on that new front wheel, or the different front wheel. I ended up putting on a MX53 pumped up to 13 psi. I was just tired of the wheel that had the moose in it. That was just too soft, kept trying to throw me down, and I was fighting it. And this was the best decision I made, was taking the time in that pit stop to change out the wheel. Yeah, it cost me about 30 minutes because I ended up taking a bigger break to get some food in me and put some more muscle rub on, but it was worth it. The front end was much more predictable, and I was able to start really getting into a flow and kicking off some great laps. In fact, at this point, the front tire was doing well enough that I was able to hang with this guy a little bit without really pushing. Where earlier in the video, he went blowing by me like I was standing still. This time, I was able to maintain my corner speed better and have a lot more predictability. This was that line that I found that I kept taking that was a lot faster. You can see, he had actually started pulling away from me, and I was able to pull up towards him a little more. And then we ended up both using this same line off to the left. Here's a section where I actually get to do some passing for once, instead of getting passed all the time. And after eating his dust for a while, I finally got to make the pass. This section coming up was actually one of my favorite sections of the race. I don't know why, I just really liked that section. So at this point in the race, we're getting later in the day, and I was worried about where my fuel level was, and so I actually took the time to stop. I ended up getting off the bike to see how much fuel I have left, and I was trying to estimate, how many more laps would we be able to get squeezed in, and am I going to need to make another pit stop for a splash of fuel? In the end, I did end up making a pit stop for a quick splash of fuel to then squeeze out another couple laps. So at that stop, I ended up finding out I had about 45 minutes left in the race, and so at this point I'm just going one more lap. That's all I'm focused on, is doing one more lap. Unfortunately, my camera battery ran out, and I wasn't stopping to put a new battery in the camera. So I apologize for not catching the last bit of the race, but in the end, I ended up putting together a good race. I ended up completing 117 miles according to the odometer on my GPS. Ended up doing 15 laps, which was a new record for me on this course. Each lap, I think, was about 7.5 miles or so. And at the end of the race, after I put my bike away, I went to timing and scoring to find out that I ended up first overall in the Rusty Iron class, which was a big surprise to me. It's my first time getting first place at this race. Of course, I've only tried the race 3 times, so I felt like my plan worked out really well, and that in the end my competition probably burnt themselves out, where I ended up working hard to stay steady and just keep plugging away. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Feel free to leave a comment below.